All right, we're going to let everyone keep coming on in. Thank you so much for being here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Patti Rother. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the president at Stay in Your Lane. And I'm also lucky enough to be the vice chair of the Pride Franchise Leadership Council with Paul Pickett. We're so happy to be able to offer this amazing session for you all ahead of Pride Month. We have some amazing content for you. We're going to start with some education, which is one of the main tenets of not just the Pride Council, but Stay in Your Lane, and then move on to what I hope will be a really fun conversation with some amazing people and friends of mine. We'll be taking questions throughout the webinar, so you can use the chat function. And I'm also going to drop in an anonymous link in case you want to ask questions, but you don't feel comfortable doing it within this space. We will be referring to those all throughout the webinar. And then we'll also be sending a resource guide afterwards to each of you to use with your teams and your brands and your friends and family to hopefully continue that education. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ingrid. Ingrid, are you there? You're on mute.
I was on mute. Welcome, everyone. This is how I roll. I'm so excited that you're here. I'm Ingrid Schneider, the CEO of Stay in Your Lane. My pronouns are she, her. Training is one of the main verticals at Stay in Your Lane. You may have seen our AI classes. It's something that we really believe in, and we're so honored to be here hosting this webinar. Last summer, we hired some interns who are studying at the University of Michigan, and we were just so pumped to have them. And they worked through some of these trainings with us to lead them and also to write them, so we have them in the future. And I love this gal that you're going to meet today, named Ruby. If you find her on LinkedIn, her name is Ella Cole. So do look her up and add her. But she wrote this, and I'll let her kind of speak to it, but we're just so excited that we get to present it with the Pride Council and the IFA today to just make franchising better. And without further ado, Ruby, I'll pass it off to you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ruby. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a senior studying sociology at the University of Michigan. So I initially got connected with Stay in Your Lane through a community engagement and leadership course that I took this past year. And throughout my time at Stay in Your Lane, I've helped design various workshops that are dedicated to educating audiences about the importance of creating inclusive spaces. So I actually made this presentation alongside one of my classmates, Isabel, but she unfortunately could not be with us today. But I am really eager for the opportunity to continue helping individuals from diverse backgrounds come together and share their experiences and foster understanding. And I'm super excited to be here with all of you today. So thank you for joining us. But if you would like to explore bringing this presentation or other kinds of workshops to your company, please reach out to Ingrid or Patti. I'd love to help out and make it happen. So thanks again for being here. I'm super excited. So today we're going to explore what the LGBTQ community is and some key concepts about sexuality, gender, and privilege. And we will also cover some useful tips about how to support the LGBTQ plus community and how to be a better ally. So this presentation really takes an educational approach because being a well-informed ally fosters effective allyship. So knowledge about the LGBTQ community empowers us to really support our colleagues authentically and proactively. So it's important to understand the nuances of sexuality, gender, and privilege. So thank you.
So before we get started, we always start with some ground rules. If you've taken any of our classes, you know this. We believe in equity first. So we are going to start from a place that might seem very simple and rudimentary to some of you, but the idea is that we just want everyone in the room to have the same basic knowledge. So we'll be going over terms and what do the letters in LGBTQIA mean? But just keep an open mind, be sure to listen and engage. And ultimately, the goal is never to agree, it's just to understand. We ask that you are respectful towards one another and respect that everyone's coming from a different starting point. Please listen with a self-reflective mindset, thinking about your own thoughts and your own beliefs. Ultimately, we want this to be a safe space, and we want to be gracious towards everyone and know that this is an okay environment. We don't expect any of us to have all the answers and be perfect and show up exactly the right way every time. It's perfectly acceptable to make mistakes and to ask any and all questions you have, and then ultimately just take space if you need it.
Great. So today we're going to be using words like diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know that these words can sometimes be sort of daunting or misunderstood. So I thought it'd be helpful to sort of start off by defining them a little bit more clearly. So when we say diversity, we refer to the presence of differences within a given setting. And it's also about recognizing and valuing those differences. So that could be somebody's race, somebody's gender, their age, their sexuality, or other dimensions of somebody's identity. Equity refers to the idea of fair treatment and equal access to opportunity and advancement for all people. Equity also sort of underscores a commitment to identify and eliminate barriers that have prevented the full participation of certain groups. And inclusion is really about creating environments in which individuals or groups feel welcomed, respected, supported, and valued. So DEI fundamentally is about supporting and including every employee and ensuring that they all have equal access to resources, opportunities, and support. But to clarify a little bit, DEI is more than just a buzzword or a passing trend. It really is a fundamental component of contemporary business practices and ethical standards. So companies across all different kinds of industries are recognizing the importance of these principles in creating really sustainable and thriving organizations, which is why all of you are here today. So diverse and inclusive workplaces lead to higher job satisfaction and employee engagement, because when employees feel seen and heard, they are more likely to be productive and committed to their work. A commitment to DEI also really attracts a broader range of candidates and helps retain valuable employees. So ultimately, having a diverse team brings a variety of perspectives and ideas, which of course is really crucial for innovation and problem solving. So I am going to pass it over to Ingrid in just a second to sort of present some data about how companies with strong DEI practices often see like really better overall performance. But I want to emphasize something really important first before we jump in. So although DEI initiatives do bring substantial advantages to businesses that we cannot ignore, it's really essential to recognize that the ethical imperative is equally, if not more significant. So to really fully reap the benefits of DEI, businesses must prioritize the ethical motivations and ensure that these principles are genuinely and effectively integrated. So only by grounding DEI efforts in a strong ethical commitment can businesses really achieve the lasting and meaningful outcomes.
Thanks, Ruby. So we're just going to talk really high level about how DEI impacts the bottom line. And we have 4 studies that are all included in your resource guide that you're all going to get via email. But it really is really impressive. And the evidence is clear that DEI is not just a moral or social imperative, but a serious strategic business advantage. And companies that invest in DEI are better positioned to innovate, capture new markets, make superior decisions, and achieve higher profitability. And we're often asked in franchise development, like, how do we get a more diverse franchise group? And honestly, diversity comes from the top. So if you are having diversity inside, it will help you make money. The experience of lower turnover rates, indicating more satisfied and engaged employees, is huge. And embracing DEI is essential for any company looking to thrive in today's diverse and dynamic business landscape. So you can see there's a Harvard Business Review article that talks about 73% of organizations that focus on DEI are more likely to reap innovation revenue, 70% are more likely to capture new markets, and 50% are more likely to make better decisions. Up to 36% more likely have done are to have, I'm having a hard time talking, sorry, above average profitability. And there's 3 other studies, but they all basically say the same thing, that DEI and focusing on it really does impact the bottom line. So the next thing is another survey. Again, we're going to include this in your notes. And this is from the UCLA School of Law from Williams Institute. And it was staggering to me and heartbreaking when I read this, to be honest with you, that this is what people experience at their job. And we've all been in uncomfortable situations, but I can't imagine being in an uncomfortable situation this much. So 46% of LGBTQIA workers have experienced unfair treatment. 50% of LGBTQIA employees are not out to their supervisors. 26% of LGBTQIA employees are not out to their coworkers. And nearly half of transgender employees reported experience of discrimination, whether that's being fired or not hired based on their LGBTQIA status. And 36% of LGBTQ employees of color have experienced verbal harassment, and 26% of white LGBTQIA employees have experienced that. And I just think we can do better as humans.
Thank you, Ingrid. Yeah, so just to sort of set the tone a little bit for this webinar, I wanted to talk a little bit about cancel culture. So cancel culture is a phenomenon that has gained significant traction in recent years with the development of social media. And it's characterized by the withdrawal of support for individuals or entities due to perceived inappropriate behavior. So this can result in public condemnation and exclusion. So why is it problematic and why are we talking about it today? So first, it really suppresses open dialogue and constructive conversation. When people fear being like quote unquote canceled for expressing dissenting opinions, it limits the exchange of ideas that are really necessary to create that kind of progress and personal growth. Instead of fostering this sort of understanding, the culture sort of leads to an us versus them mentality, which again limits the opportunity for learning and further growth. And our approach today with this presentation is to really branch away from cancel culture. So we're striving to cultivate a space where all of you don't feel afraid or shameful for having a difference in opinion or a difference in level of background knowledge. Instead, we really want to create an open dialogue, embrace the diversity of thought, and encourage respectful engagement from all of you. And then that being said, today we're going to learn a lot about inclusive language and the importance of using inclusive language when we're talking about allyship. But we want to acknowledge that, first of all, this is not the only way to practice ethical allyship, but also it sort of can sometimes inadvertently exclude certain people, especially people who are less familiar with it. But we just want to clarify that we're here today not to dictate your language, police what you say and what you do not say. We're really here to just create open dialogue about the LGBTQ community, about the importance of inclusivity, and share our experiences and our insights. So that's just a quick note before we get started.
Thanks, Ruby. We also want to acknowledge that this environment may be a space where people share personal details about their life. And we're going to foster some open conversation. Let's agree to respect those details and keep whatever is shared in this space. In this space, we are recording this, but even if you watch it on recording, just be respectful of people and what they share. We can take what's in here and keep it safe, but we can take what we learn in here and that can leave and change our environments, and we can help that in other spheres of our lives. Remember that Patti has dropped in, I believe, a URL where you can ask anonymous questions, or you can actually just drop questions in the chat if you're comfortable. Again, we want this to be a place where you can ask questions and be acknowledged, and we're here to support and answer in any way that we can.
And then one last acknowledgement before we jump in. This presentation really serves as sort of an introductory level to a lot of complex issues surrounding the LGBTQ community. So every individual within this spectrum has their own unique lived experiences, and it's really crucial to understand that allyship really takes on different forms with different people, because everybody within this spectrum has different needs. So this means that what might be supportive for one person might not be the same for another. So while we are talking about the LGBTQIA community as a whole, we can't speak to everybody's specific experience. And then we also wanted to note that the LGBTQ community varies a lot across cultural lines. And so this presentation takes a very Western perspective.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is simply what is an ally. And this is a very simple definition. It's an individual who may or may not identify with LGBTQIA+, but supports and affirms all individuals.
And then what is LGBTQIA? So put simply, it's a community. It's a community of people that is characterized by its inclusivity, diversity, and overall their dedication to promoting equality and acceptance of all of its members. The plus at the end, we just want to clarify this, signifies the continuous acknowledgement of new identities, as well as the sort of dynamic nature of language and comprehension within the community. And then here we're going to define the difference between sexuality and gender, because this is going to be really important for sort of setting the groundwork for the other things that we're going to talk about later on. So sexuality pertains to an individual's unique engagement in sexual behaviors. So this encompasses a lot of different factors like sexual attraction, libido, and their personal identification in connection to those aspects. And then gender refers to the socially constructed notions of both femininity and masculinity, which importantly evolve over time and again can vary a lot across different cultures. So we're going to also talk about this other term, non-binary, a little bit later. But non-binary refers to an identity that fits outside of the traditional binary of feminine and masculine. So feel free to drop any questions in the chat about that, but we all are also going to return to it later. So here we have the acronym, and Ingrid is going to lead us through a little bit more detailed explanation of each group. But just to go over it, L is for lesbian, G is for gay, B, bisexual, T, transgender, Q, queer, I, intersex, A, asexual, and plus other genders and sexualities.
Thanks, Ruby. So I just want to acknowledge that I didn't know what all of these meant at some points in times. And sometimes they're evolving, which we're going to talk about a little too. And it's okay. Like, you're okay. You're going to learn. I want to continue to grow, and I hope that you do too. So understanding these acronyms is huge. It used to just be LGBTQ. It's kept going, and they keep adding, which is great too. So starting to define the acronym, a lesbian is an individual who identifies as a woman and is only sexually attracted to women. Gay is traditionally an individual who identifies as a man and only sexually attracted to men. This can also serve as an encompassing term for the whole community, which is new. Bisexual is when an individual with any gender is sexually attracted to both men and women. Transgender is an individual who identifies with a gender they were not assigned with at birth. Queer is a really interesting one because it was once used as a derogatory term, and it's now been reclaimed as an umbrella term for someone who doesn't identify as heterosexual and or cisgender. Intersex is a person who was born with reproductive system or sexual anatomy that doesn't fit the typical definition of a female or a male. And asexual is when an individual with any gender identity experiences no sexual attraction.
Okay, so we're gonna take a quick pause. Any questions, feel free again to use that link or drop them in the chat about anything we've covered so far. We do have one that just wants some further explanation between what intersex is and what asexual is. How are those different? Ruby, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So intersex refers to somebody that is born with the reproductive anatomy that doesn't fit into either male or female. So it's about somebody's assigned gender at birth, and is specifically talking about somebody's reproductive anatomy. And then asexual is about sexuality, and it refers to somebody who does not have physical attraction or little to none of physical attraction to another person. And that could be somebody of any gender identity.
Got it. That's all we got so far. Let's keep on keeping on.
Awesome. So I'm going to have a quick recap. with sex versus gender, and sex refers to the biological characteristics that someone is born with. And these characteristics won't always fit into male and female. Some spoken may be born with intersex, like we just talked about, which is in someone with sexual reproductive organs that doesn't reflect strictly male or female anatomy. And gender is actually our social expression of our biological sex differences. It's important to know that gender does not always align or correlate with a specific biological sex. So if you have any questions about that, drop them into the chat.
Yeah, so now we're going to talk about the three main constructs of gender. So assignment has to do with the gender that somebody is assigned at birth and is correlated with the sex that is expected for gender expression. So assignment really has to do with the biological characteristics that somebody is born with. And then expression is the way that we present ourselves and our gender to the world. So it's how we perform and express gender to those around us. And that can take on many different forms. It can be in presentation of self, so like the clothing that somebody wears, the jewelry that they wear, but it can also be other things that don't have to do with presentation, things like demeanor or body language. So those are just some important things to keep in mind. And then identity is really about an individual's sense of self in relation to their gender. So it's how somebody feels about their own gender, and somebody's identity may or may not fit expectations that are associated with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So somebody might be born with female reproductive autonomy and be assigned female at birth, but then later on identify as a man. And then here we just have some more helpful terminology. A lot of this might be pretty self-explanatory, but we thought it could be useful. So gender stereotypes are oversimplified but strongly held ideas about characteristics of gender. And gender norms are really how gender is expected to be presented. And gender binary is a method of gender organization that believes the only genders are male and female. So we live in a society in the United States of a binary system of gender where male and female are the primary two genders that are recognized as legitimate. And then pronouns are a third person pronoun by which an individual wishes to be referred to in order to indicate their gender identity. So for example, I am a woman, I identify as a woman, and I use she, her pronouns. And one of my close friends identifies as non-binary and they use they, them pronouns. Something to keep in mind about pronouns is that sometimes people who are non-binary use two different pronouns. So somebody might be non-binary, but will list their pronouns as he, they. And there are various reasons as to why somebody might choose those two to list two different pronouns. Sometimes it's because they feel comfortable being referred to as both, but that's just sort of something to keep in mind when we're thinking about pronouns.
And then in the same way that we broke down gender, we really want to talk about the main concepts of sexuality. So the first thing that you'll often hear is sexual orientation or sexual identity. This is simply how an individual is choosing to label themselves in accordance to their own sexuality. So for example, I identify as a lesbian. I'll typically say gay because I feel like that's less aggressive for people. But that's how I choose to identify. Attraction is encompassing a diverse range of all emotional, romantic, and physical connections that draw individuals to others, regardless of whether it leads to sexual behavior. So this can be your attraction to friends that you want in your life, who you choose as your work bestie. It's essentially who you want to surround yourself with. It doesn't always have to be sexual in nature. Behavior is how an individual decides to form or nurture a specifically romantic or sexual connection. So how you choose to get closer to your partner, your spouse, your wife, your husband. I'm all about quality time. So that's how I'm going to behave around my spouse in order to continue to nurture that relationship. And then ultimately desire. This is an individual's desire to engage in sexual behavior. So it often lands somewhere in the spectrum of a really strong sexual desire to no sexual desire at all. So again, that asexual group, they typically have very little to no sexual desire, but they still may be attracted to their partner of choice, and they will showcase behaviors of wanting to continue to nurture that romantic relationship. Ingrid, you're muted again.
I didn't realize I did that. I'm so sorry. So I'm going to explain some other terms and under the binary systems of gender, and these are common terms that we use. So cisgender, sometimes said cis, people say cis, is a term that means you were born a girl and you identify as a girl, or born a boy and identify as a boy. I'm cisgender. Non-binary is an individual who doesn't identify exclusively with a gender binary. So they could identify as male or female, either one. Heterosexual is an individual who is attracted to members of the opposite sex exclusively. And heteronormativity is the belief or assumption that all people identify as heterosexual. And heteronormativity is not a great place to be as far as allyship goes. So just a reminder that this isn't all-encompassing. It's not a cohesive list. There's more within the spectrum of sexuality and gender expression, and all are valid.
Okay, so this is what I like to call the gingerbread person, and it's really just a visual representation of a lot of the things that we've been talking about today. I always learn better with a picture, so I thought it might be helpful to sort of switch it up a little bit. So identity, which is what we have here at the top, is an individual's sense of self in relation to gender. So it's really about how much somebody aligns with or does not align with what we understand to be the options for gender. And then expression is this sort of outside part. And this is how somebody chooses to express themselves to the outside world. So like we talked about earlier, this could be with your presentation of self or other things that are not involved with the way that you present yourself physically. And then orientation, it refers to who you are sexually or romantically attracted to. So that could be nobody because you are asexual, meaning that you don't have sexual attraction to other people, or aromantic, which means you tend not to have emotional attraction to other people. Or it could mean that you are both romantically and sexually attracted to men and women, or masculinity and femininity, or some sort of variation of those things. And then sex refers to the biological characteristics that somebody is born with and the gender that they are assigned at birth.
Okay, so we're getting a ton of really great questions. Feel free to either drop them in the chat or go ahead and ask them on that anonymous thread. We have a bunch about pronouns, so I'm going to kind of ask it as one big question. And Ruby, I'll probably just hand it over to you. But number one, is it inappropriate to ask someone what their pronouns are? And what would be the best way to ask a new or existing employee about their pronouns? And lastly, is it okay to assume they them pronouns unless told otherwise, as almost like an all-encompassing pronoun usage?
Okay, those are great questions. So it is definitely a great thing to ask people what their pronouns are. I think that, when you sort of create a space where you're sharing your pronouns and you're asking other people what their pronouns are, you're cultivating a space where people who are not cisgender would feel comfortable sharing their pronouns. So I always encourage people to share their pronouns and ask other people what they are. A good way to phrase it sometimes is like, my pronouns are she, her. What are your pronouns if you feel comfortable sharing? So that's sort of a good way to ease into it. And then what was the second one again?
Just for an employee, is there a great way to ask them in an appropriate way what their pronouns might be, if not that, what you just said? And then the idea of using they, them as kind of an all-encompassing pronoun term, just to potentially not offend anybody.
Yeah, so for the second one, just what I sort of said for the first one, just generally like using them and initiating the conversation of pronouns is a great way to do that for somebody that you already know or somebody that you're meeting for the first time. And then, yeah, I would say generally using they, them is a great way to just sort of speak neutrally about pronouns. When you don't know somebody's pronouns or it doesn't necessarily feel like the appropriate time to ask somebody, definitely using they, them is a great way to not place any assumptions on anyone.
Amazing. We have some quick term differences, and then I'm gonna head back into the slide. But Can you explain the difference between pansexual, which is actually not something we talked about, versus bisexual?
Yeah. So bisexual is refers to somebody who has sexual or romantic attraction to somebody that is man or woman. And pansexual refers to somebody who's attracted to people regardless of their gender. And so essentially they mean very, very similar things, but binary or bisexual is sort of developed under the framework of a binary system of gender where we only recognize men and women as legitimate forms of gender identity. And so it pansexual is sort of a more encompassing way to say bisexual is how I think about it. Like pansexual means that you're acknowledging that there are genders that fit outside of the binary, whereas bisexual is operating under a framework of a binary system of gender. But yeah, they're sometimes used interchangeably, they're sometimes not, but at the end of the day, that is the key differentiator and they mean similar things.
I think too, the way I always remember is like pansexual would be attracted to a trans person or an intersex person, whereas bisexual really kind of falls, like you said, in that binary. We have a really great question in the chat itself that I'm going to try and make just very short. But it used to just be gay, and then we got LGBT, and then we got LGBTQIA, and then we added a plus. What is the point of continuing to add letters? And when does it just become like a little bit ridiculous or too much to have 10,000 letters to encompass this huge community?
Yeah. So I would say that the idea of the like addition to the acronym is to just sort of recognize that there is a constant dynamic or nuanced dynamic that is always developing and there are always new identities. And so it's sort of just like validating the fact that like things change and that people gender is fluid and sexuality is fluid and things are always changing. Which is why there has been that sort of recognition in the changing of the acronym. I think that it is important to remember though that like they're not placing so much emphasis on like how you're referring to the group is really important as long as you're doing it in a way that is respectful and is meaningful. That's what's really important. So I think reminding yourself not to stress too much about like, oh, it's changed again, like I can't keep up. It's more just about like being respectful and listening and doing your part to really engage meaningfully.
Amazing. All right, let's move on to talk through privilege.
Awesome. So we're going to take a look at the different kinds of privilege. And what is privilege? It's advantages people have by virtue of their status or position in society. So there's different kinds, and this isn't all of them, but three of the most commons are unearned privilege, which is privileges that someone's born with. Financial status, your mom and dad could have a ton of money. White privilege is huge. Cisgender privilege, pretty privilege, thin privilege, the list could go on. Earned privilege is privilege which results from earning a degree or fulfilling responsibilities or being a CEO or anything that you have earned along the way. Systems of inequality and privilege are systems that discriminate and privilege based on perceived differences. So this could be racism or sexism or classism. And again, the list could go on. So it's just really important that we not acknowledge this.
Yeah, definitely. So the reason that we're talking about privilege today in this conversation about allyship is that it's really important to consider your own positionality when you're talking about allyship. So part of having a self-reflective mindset is to examine what privileges you have and how that sort of contributes to conversations about allyship and how it contributes to conversations that you have with other people and what their privileges look like and what their identities look like. So that's why we're sort of transitioning into a conversation about privilege. So piggybacking off of that, we're now going to talk about Kimberly Crenshaw, who we have a wonderful picture of right here on the right, and the term intersectionality. So Kimberly Crenshaw is a prominent law professor and a civil rights advocate. She has done a lot of really great work in developing critical race theory and addressing social inequality. She's been really pivotal in sort of talking about the unique experiences of all marginalized individuals, but a lot of her work is really centered on the experiences of women of color. She is also very well known for coining the term intersectionality. So, intersectionality examines how overlapping social identities, such as race, gender, class, contribute to systemic oppression and discrimination. So, essentially, intersectionality is sort of a framework for understanding how different facets of a person's social or political identity combine to create unique modes of discrimination and privilege. So, as she states, a prism for seeing the way in which various forms of inequality often operate together and exacerbate one another. And then here we just have a visual representation of intersectionality, so you can see sort of the overlapping facets of people's identities. And why are we talking about it? So intersectionality is really crucial for understanding allyship because it ensures that the diverse and overlapping identities of marginalized individuals are both recognized and also supported. And so without understanding intersectionality, efforts to sort of address discrimination and DEI initiatives more generally can overlook the sort of unique challenges that are faced by people who belong to multiple marginalized groups. So embracing an intersectional approach allows both allies and DEI initiatives to provide more comprehensive and inclusive support, which ultimately fosters true equity and understanding.
So there's one really great question that I want to make sure we address before we head over to our panel here soon. But somebody asked, does heteronormativity assume not only that everyone is either male or female, but also that everyone in the world is only attracted to the opposite sex? Is it both and, or is it just about either being male or female?
Yeah, so this is a really great question and it's a little bit confusing, but yes. So technically, heteronormativity does refer to sexuality. And then there's this other term that's called cisnormativity that has to do with gender, which assumes that people are always identifying with the gender that they were assigned at birth. But because heteronormative frameworks are sort of built on the idea that gender is binary and that there's only male and female, and that the normal sort of like sexual attraction happens only between men and women, people tend to sort of assume that all people are cisgender, right? And so in like a heteronormative context, people tend to use the terms interchangeably or just use heteronormativity because heterosexuality and cisgender identities are both sort of the default assumption about people.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about some key ways to just sort of be a good ally. So one thing you can do is try to use inclusive language. So we live in a world where a lot of our language is really gendered and a lot of it we don't even really notice anymore. So doing your best to just be conscious of that and trying to use inclusive language when you can is a great first step towards effective and meaningful allyship. So for example, when you're speaking to a big group of people or you're in like a Zoom meeting like this one, using terms like you all instead of you guys is a really great one to just sort of be conscious of that and be inclusive. And then, like we sort of mentioned earlier when we were talking about pronouns, initiating pronoun conversations are great. They set the tone for everybody else to share their pronouns, and they really make people who are not cisgender or maybe use they, them pronouns more comfortable sharing those pronouns. I think this is especially important in the workplace where there is sort of a lot of shame around people who are gender nonconforming, don't identify as a man or a woman. And then some other great things are you can add your pronouns into your email thread. So when you like sign off and say goodbye, it shows your pronouns. And then LinkedIn also now has a feature where you can add them in. So that's great. And then I'm going to pass it over to Patti.
Yeah, and we have so many amazing questions. So we're going to be mindful of time so we can get over to Cassidy and the team there. But really important is obviously to be a good ally, specifically in the workplace and at your brand. Really, action speaks so much louder than words. If you are in a position of power and you can impact policies at your company, communicate them clearly, add them to all your handbooks and your manuals. And then obviously have clear consequences for infringement. It's one thing to have a policy in place, and it's another to actually hold people accountable to said policies. Celebrate diversity. This one is pretty darn simple. Celebrate already existing moments and events like Black History Month and Pride Month coming up, and just be loud about it within your organization in whatever way feels comfortable to you all. And then thinking about benefits, I always tell folks to talk to their vendor partners and their suppliers, especially their healthcare provider, if you offer healthcare at your company, and talk to them about coverage of gender affirming care, or even coverage for partners who are not legally married. I know for my wife and I, we could not get legally married for a while until it was legalized in the country. And we had to pay individually for healthcare. And that was very, very costly for each of us, even though we were very much in the same household. So talking to your healthcare provider about offering that will make a huge impact to the people in your team that identify as LGBTQ.
Most importantly, we just want to emphasize that you need to have, and we need to have a self-reflective mindset. So homophobia and transphobia can be seen all around us through microaggressions. And if you don't know what that is, we're going to include a really great video in our resource guide. This is a nurturing self-reflective mindset, and it's imperative to create a truly welcoming and comfortable environment for LGBTQIA+ individuals. And microaggressions are the everyday slights and insults that we say that are offensive, that we just really don't know that they're offensive, and marginalized people experience them on a daily basis. So usually it's well-intentioned individuals who just may be unaware that they've engaged in saying something demeaning, like saying, you don't look gay, or you don't look trans. Those are very much not very thought through and well-versed statements, but people just may not have bad intentions in those microaggressions.
Yeah, thank you both. So to wrap it up, allyship is fundamentally about being a good human. So at the end of the day, we just need to work on showing compassion and meeting people where they are, and using whatever power we do have, like Patti said, to drive real practical policies that support these people. So by putting your best foot forward to learn about the LGBTQ community and engage in conversation about them and with them, and showing empathy are all really great steps towards meaningful allyship. So even just showing up here today is a really great step. So on that note, thank you all so much for coming, and thank you for having me. This has been such a great opportunity, and I love speaking with all of you. Again, if you enjoyed this presentation and are interested in having it or other similar work done at your companies, please reach out to Ingrid or Patti. I would love to help out and make some cool stuff happen. So thank you all. And now I'm going to hand it over to our wonderful panelists. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Ruby. That was amazing. You're amazing. Again, if you want some more continued education, please reach out. We're happy to help. I'm so excited about our group of panelists who are all on the Pride Franchise Leadership Council. They're also just incredible people who show up as allies in every space that they enter into. They've each had a personal impact on my own life, and I'm so happy to hand it off to my dear friend, Cassidy Ford, who's going to lead this part of the conversation. And Ruby, you can go ahead and stop the share. And I'm going to highlight everyone.
Hey, everyone. I don't know about y'all, but as much as I've gone through this content and talked and I'm so close to this community, my mind is blown every time that I listen to Ruby or Ingrid or Patti. So I think we've got Tim. We're going to spotlight the group here. Pete's on here.
I got Paige.
Paige is coming up. So, mind being blown as it is, I know that Tim, Pete, Paige, y'all's minds must be blown as well. But I kind of just wanted to start it just to double down on what Ingrid and Patti and Ruby were saying. You know, we know that we're not experts, but we also know that we're allies to the LGBTQIA community. And so, my first question for everyone is how, I guess, why is it that you are an ally to the LGBTQIA community? And we'll start, let's go with Tim.
Yeah, great. Well, I can only echo your comments there, Cassidy. I mean, wow, amazing stuff. And special thank you to Ingrid, Patti, and Ruby for all the hard work to get us prepared. So I appreciate it. Look, I was very fortunate to be raised in a way that was really heavily focused on respect and inclusivity, so I really have to give a lot of credit to that beginning stage of my life around respect being something that was critical, right? It didn't matter what facet of what I was doing in my life. Respect was just like absolutely the cornerstone of our family values. So it was very natural and normal that I was around a lot of different people with different backgrounds and different ideas. As early as the early 80s. Now I'm dating myself, right? So that's just really helped me get into the right mindset of respect for others, and how they want to be treated is a critical component of how I was raised.
And that's so huge. Paige, what about you?
Hey, just want to echo Tim. What an incredible presentation. I'm really just happy to be here, and so honored to be included. Tim, I'm with you. Raised in a really open and inclusive household. I think every webinar I'm ever on, somehow my grandmothers come up in conversation. And, what would we do without grandparents to just really kind of help us hone in on what our values, core values are? So I attribute a lot of the way that I was raised and brought up to, my parents and grandparents. But beyond that, my very first job that is a memorable part of my ally experience was working in a restaurant that I probably about 75–80% of the employees were part of the LGBTQ community. And we had the great fortune of being across the street from the best gay bar in town. And so got to see, a lot of different walks of life. And I was new, I was clumsy, I had no idea what I was doing, but this community of people enveloped me with so much love and respect and just openness that I just decided I was going to protect them as much as I could and show them the same openness that they had shown me. And so really since then, I think I've gravitated towards the community and just hope to be able to repay a tiny, tiny little bit of the kindness that they've always shown me.
I love that, Paige. Pete, what about you?
Yeah, similar to Tim, and again, thank you for inviting me to be on this panel as well. I'm honored. Similar to Tim and Paige, I'd have to talk about my upbringing, and specifically, all of my grandparents immigrated from Italy in the early 1900s. Okay, and Italians were discriminated against quite a bit. Okay, to the point where they changed their names to sound less Italian. And my grandparents and my parents were not like that at all. And so they became, I think, because of that experience and what they endured as immigrants, they became very, very inclusive. They were just friends of everyone, and I think that was the foundation for me. And then I had an experience where coming from a small town in upstate New York that was pretty lily white. Okay, I ended up at a all-black college in Baltimore, and I experienced that firsthand, of being excluded, of being, in essence, discriminated against there by being one of the only white guys around, and didn't like it. too much. And I think between my upbringing and that experience, I just developed a core belief that I should be kind to everyone and be inclusive and you know, be a as good a person as you can possibly be. And I think that's why I'm an ally.
It's never great to feel like you're the odd one out, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So my question now is, given your experiences and given this path of allyship and this position that you find yourselves in life, right? How do you put your allyship to work in your organizations?
Yeah, I mean, I'll kick it off again if you want to stay in the same cycle there. You know, for us at Central Bark, it's I don't want to say it's an easy thing because but it is a historical thing, is what I should say, meaning that it's been ingrained in who we are for a very, very long time. It's actually one of the things that attracted me to the business, which was, you know, many companies have got, in fact, all companies have a mission, vision, and values, right? But how many companies utilize that value system as the opportunity to express something that we will not bend on, right? And compassion is one of ours. We will not bend on compassion. We will not allow anything that is not focused with that lens of compassion. And it's definitely, as we talked about in this presentation, it starts at the top. It's driven by my CEO. It is something that is constant lens that I look through on everything that I do. I'm very proud to say I've got 3 or 4 of my teammates on the call today. It's something that we all are very focused on. It starts at the top, and it's just a factual way that we represent our business. We do what we say what we do, we respect, and we have compassion.
Tim, I'll have
Paige.
to jump on the Tim bandwagon again. You know, I have this sneaking suspicion we're going to agree on a lot of things today. But being in leadership at a healthcare company, it's really always been in our DNA, in our fabric, to treat our patients with respect and meet them where they're at as well. And so really from our core business model, which has always been very patient centric and focused, that's something that's always been a non-negotiable for us. And then in a position of leadership, my goal has always been to be open, celebrate differences, and to make our organization a place where everyone feels safe. And so I hope, I hope that we're doing a pretty good job of that. I think that everyone can do a better job always. There's always room for improvement. But proud to say that we've got some really diverse leadership in our organization. And so hopefully we're all making each other a little bit better each day.
That little bit at a time is so huge, right? That and just that encompassing everyone, right? So Pete, what about you? How do you put your allyship to use in your organization?
Yeah, I think it stems from you know, leadership and our core values, and really trying to live by those core values. And our core values are dedication, respect, integrity, vision, and engagement. Okay. And so with our franchisees, with our employees, it's you know, really important that we practice what we preach, and that we you know, Patti said earlier, you know, actions speak louder than words, and you can put those words up, you know, for everybody to see. But if as leaders, you don't live by them, you know, then they become hollow, you know. And I think that we do a good job, and I give a lot of credit to Barb Moran Goodrich, who's the owner of the company, and who was critical in developing those core values, and making sure that that we all, you know, exercise them. And I'll give you an example of you know, how we put it to use. We had a situation a year or two ago where we had at a franchisee store a manager who was dealing with a gay customer who was upset and you know, spoke inappropriately to him. and the customer was upset and called, and I give Barb all the credit. I mean, I assisted a little bit, but Barb is the one who really led the charge in straightening that out, and then making sure that our franchisee and that employee knew that wasn't going to be tolerated, that we weren't going to treat people that way, and so it wasn't a matter of just satisfying the customer and taking care of the customer. It was a matter of also making sure that our culture, survived that, and that they understood that it was inappropriate and it wasn't going to happen again, and that came right from the top.
Mm-hmm.
That was Barb, leading that charge.
That's a great point, Pete. And I think we have time for one last question. And Tim, I'm actually going to ask this one for you, because we do experience some pushback sometimes, or we have these situations where we have conflict because not everyone's exercising the core values. But how do you navigate potential challenges from a franchisee perspective for someone who might give you resistance to implementing LGBTQIA policies or initiatives?
Yeah, and so it's again starts with the top, but we're also exceptionally clear on day one, right? And so on day one in our training room where we do our discovery day, we actually have a big, huge sign that we make sure we point out and we talk about, which is that we don't discriminate against dog breeds, so you better believe we're not going to discriminate against human beings either. So we try to make it playful so that it's something we can talk about right away. On top of that, when a candidate is first getting interested to become a franchisee, one of the tricks that we have is that, yes, we have the application, we have all the processes that everyone else has as well, but as they get closer to joining, we actually require what's called a pet resume, and we tell them to tell us about their pet journey and why their pets were so important, and that leads into their family. And so you start to see a lot about who they are as people in that presentation, because for us, it starts, and then actually I've got to give credit all the way up to my private equity group, that from that point all the way down, they love that idea. They love the idea that we're very, very conscientious about who will join, right? Now, it's a little bit easier for me in the sense that one of our co-founders is a wonderfully, beautifully outspoken gay man who started us on this path. Right. So I joined an organization that had that core already there. So as we started to really turn the spigot on and start our growth, I was able to still have that inflection point, have that culture piece, and have that upfront conversation and not being afraid to have it.
So it's coming from the top, it's trickle down effect, and it's something that's discussed from the outset, right? So this has been amazing. Thank you so much for joining to talk about this as an ally to the community. So I'm going to pass it back to Patti to close things out.
Thank you all so much. We are so happy to be able to offer this to you all. And there will be a resource guide that comes out here right after the call. There were also some amazing questions that we just didn't get to because of time. So we're going to go ahead and probably address those in the resource guide as well. And then keep an eye on the Pride Franchise Leadership Council LinkedIn page, because we have an amazing allyship campaign all during Pride Month that we're so happy about, that many of you actually contributed to. So thank you to everyone who did that. And please follow the page if you don't. Reach out to Stay in Your Lane if you want the amazing Ruby to come and educate your team members and your brands as well. So thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.